Good morning. This is my first stab at an Ask an Adventurer Q&A. You guys have been sending in some questions and I'm going to answer them. Pretty simple. I've got a list of your questions, I've got a cup of coffee, and I have to confess that I stole this idea from Beau Miles. If you don't know Beau Miles' YouTube, I'm sure you do, please check it out. He's got some fantastic videos, a magnificent beard and a wonderful approach to life and adventure. So yeah, I stole this off Beau. Thanks, Beau. Right, question one that's come through. As a 31-year-old with a busy work life, recently married, kids on the horizon, one last adventure before I settle down. If you had 1 week and £1,500, what would you do as a final blowout before the adventure of family begins? Wow. Well, at the risk of meaning that nobody watches beyond the first 2 minutes of my first ever Q&A, I think I might bring in the subject of pensions now. If I could learn one thing over again from my education, that we never even taught either at school, uni, family, one thing I wish I'd learnt, and you were not expecting this, is the power of compound interest. In other words, I wish I had started a pension when I was 18. If I had, I might well be retired by now. So what you need to do is get a Vanguard pension. Don't pay fees to someone. Get a Vanguard pension. Start paying in as much of that money every week as you can, and you'll be retired much earlier than you expect. And just in case that talk of pensions hasn't killed off everyone, the question of £1,500 for 1 week of adventure, well, I personally have stopped flying now, which might be a topic for future time, so that'll suck more joy out of my answers. So £1,500 1 week, I would get a ferry over to Scandinavia and I would ride my bike around for a week. I would wild camp. I'd enjoy their Allemansretten, the right to roam responsibly, to wild camp, and I would just ride my bike, eat camp food and drink coffee in little cafes along the way. That's probably not the epic adventure you were hoping for, but I apologise for that. Question two, you introduced me to John Richardson and the Futurenauts. Oh yes, great podcast. Which Element episode had the biggest impact on you and your thinking? John Richardson and the Futurenauts, great podcast about the future of the world, and inevitably a lot of that's about the climate and the environment. So I knew that the single biggest crisis we're facing is ridiculous fossil fuel use. Even today on the news, all the countries in the world at COP are arguing about whether they should phase down rather than phase out fossil fuels, which is so ridiculously selfish and short-sighted. Anyway, I knew all that, but what I hadn't really appreciated was the things that I can have some sort of impact on, because I'm not going to change the OPEC oil producing countries' policies. But what I hadn't realised was just how linked the way we use our land is with the environmental loss of biodiversity and wildlife and the impact on river pollution and on emissions. So I've become, from, I guess, partly through those guys, really interested in how we use our land and the impact of industrial farming on nature and the climate. Next question. After all these years, do you still have a fire in your belly to travel internationally? As I grow old, I have less desire and local exploration appeals more to me. You? Wow. I still have fire in my belly for travel, to go to new places. I have a map of the world up on my shed ceiling here. But my interest is more in living in places rather than hammering as fast as I could from A to B. And I certainly have lost the fire in my belly for suffering. You know, my big dream of the South Pole expedition, which would have been an enormous 100-day sufferfest. It seems a bit cold and hard now. So I'm much more interested in getting to know some place really well. And my local place is obviously the simplest and easiest place to do that. But right now, as the rain rattles on the shed roof in December, I wouldn't mind exploring a nice, warm, little Pyrenean warm village somewhere. Except, of course, thanks to Brexit, we voted to not be allowed to spend 90 days in all these lovely places, which was really smart. While adventuring, did race relations ever come into play? You stand out in many of the lands through which you travelled. Were you ever treated differently, whether positively or negatively, because of the colour of your skin? Yeah, when I cycle around the world, I was, for the first time in my life, usually an ethnic minority. So I spent months in the Middle East, spent a year in Africa, year in South America, year in Asia, where I looked generally very different to everybody else. And that was such a useful experience for then thinking about what life is like in my country for people who are in an ethnic minority or just look differently here. I hated it, man. Just people sort of staring at me, looking at me, quite often in places where they hadn't really seen many white guys. People would be, well, sometimes kids would just be terrified and sprint away from me crying. I have that effect on people. People in China, rural China, pulling my nose because it's such a big white man nose, or people stroking my arms in different countries because they're sort of pale and blonde hair. I hated it. I hated people staring at me. And yet then the flip side, not flip side, but I suppose white privilege is that quite often if I'd get to some sort of, I don't know, visa office or some sort of official type place, then people would make me jump the queue and stuff because I was different to the local people. And certainly in Britain, if someone who looks different comes into some sort of official office, they definitely don't get to jump the queue. It doesn't work that way in reverse. So it was an interesting experience. I can't claim to have any big experience of prejudice, but at least I got a taste of what it was like to be a minority. And one thing I really enjoyed about getting, say, to North America was that as long as I didn't speak, everyone just assumed, oh, here's an American guy, and just ignored me. And then when I got back to England after 4 years on the road, I really loved just being part of an anonymous majority again, because life is so much easier that way. I like the random variety of these questions. Locally, how well known are you? Does everyone know you as Alice Humphreys adventure guy, or are you just another bloke? So I'm quite weird. I really, although I spend time showing off about myself on the internet like this, I actually don't like people knowing about my adventures and stuff in real life. And that's because I just want to talk to normal people about normal stuff, not to have to sort of tell stories about cycling through Inner Mongolia or something. So I actually go to some weirdly kind of obtuse lengths to keep my lives very separate. So around where I live, basically, pretty much no one knows that I do adventure-y stuff, and those that I do, so all my friends around here, I sort of tie myself in weirdly obtuse conversationalist knots to get out of ever having to talk about adventuring type stuff, which probably means I'm quite annoying and a bad conversationalist. What's your diet? Vegan, vegetarian, carnivore? And who cooks? So I do all the cooking in our household, and my diet, slightly in relation to that previous answer, actually in recent years I've become vegan. I'm a reluctant vegan because I love meat and cheese, but learning about land, the amount of land used on the planet in order so I can have cheeseburgers, just felt I just couldn't do it anymore. Do you cut your own hair? What? Is that an insult or a compliment? I'm going to take it as a compliment. Yes, thank you. I do cut my own hair. Yeah, sometimes I miss quite chunks at the back, but I can't see the back, so I don't really care. So, yeah, I do cut my hair. Beyond adventuring, do you consider yourself an unnecessary risk taker? I don't consider myself an unnecessary risk taker, even within adventures. I don't do base jumping. I don't do, Alex Honnold free solo type climbing. In fact, I don't do any climbing at all. The adventures I do are really not very dangerous, or they're certainly very much within the areas of controlled risk. So I don't think I'm a risk taker in any part of my life. No. Well, that was a good start. Thank you for those questions. I hope that some of the answers were interesting. If you have any questions, send them in to me on the form that I will link to. Thanks very much.